The stars were dying, and so were the Rithani. Vyeth Sorin stood at the observation window of the command ship Lastlight and watched the slow crawl of his people's fleet through empty space. 42 ships. Some of them were older than he was. Their hulls were patched with whatever metal the engineers could find, their engines running on borrowed time and desperate prayer. Inside those ships lived 1.6 million Rithani, the last of their kind. Their homeworld, Sethara, was gone, not destroyed in some great explosion or conquered by an enemy fleet. It had simply been swallowed. Their star had begun to collapse, slowly and without drama, like an old man falling asleep in a chair. The oceans boiled first, then the atmosphere thinned, then the ground itself cracked and bled fire. The Rithani had watched their world die over the course of 40 years, and they had done the only thing they could do. They ran. That was 12 years ago. Vyeth pressed his long fingers against the cold glass. His skin glowed faintly in the dark, a soft blue light that pulsed with his heartbeat. All Rithani glowed. It was how they showed emotion, how they spoke without words. Right now, his light was dim, almost gray, the color of exhaustion, the color of a man who had sent too many messages into the void and received nothing back. He had sent signals to every major power in the galactic median. The Drayli Dominion, the largest military empire in the known galaxy, had responded first. Their offer was simple. The Rithani could settle on one of their mining worlds. In exchange, the Dominion would take 30% of the Rithani population as a permanent labor force. When Vyeth asked what would happen to those workers, the Drayli diplomat had smiled with too many teeth and said the word, service. The Voss Compact had been more polite, but no less cruel. They offered asylum in exchange for biological samples. The Rithani's bioluminescent cells, they explained, had enormous commercial value. They wanted tissue harvesting rights. Voluntary, of course, at first. The synodal hive did not even pretend. They offered to absorb the Rithani into their collective consciousness. No more suffering, they promised. No more fear. No more individual thought either. But they did not mention that part loudly. Every door Vyeth knocked on had a price behind it. Every hand extended came with chains attached. He had stopped believing that kindness existed between the stars. Now he stood in his quarters, reading the latest report from his navigation officers. The fleet was running low on fuel. 3 ships had failing life support. The medical bays were overwhelmed. Children were being born into corridors because there was no room left in the birthing chambers. His people were not dying all at once. They were dying slowly, one small failure at a time, and he could feel each one like a crack in his own bones. His advisor, a younger Rithani named Delsha, entered the room. Her glow was a worried orange. "Elder," she said quietly, "the Council wants to revisit the Dominion's offer." Vyeth closed his eyes. "They want us to sell our own people. They want to survive. Some of them think that surviving with chains is better than dying free." He understood them. He truly did. When you watched children coughing in ships that could barely hold air, philosophy became a luxury. But he could not do it. He could not hand his people over to be used like fuel cells and call it rescue. "There is one more signal I want to send," he said. Delsha frowned. "To whom?" "We have contacted every civilization in the median." "Not every one." He pulled up a star chart and pointed to the far edge of the galactic rim, a small, unremarkable yellow star. A single inhabited planet orbiting it. Them. Delsha stared at the chart. "The humans?" "Yes. Elder, with great respect, the humans they are barely a spacefaring species. They have been in the galactic community for less than a century. The median considers them primitives. They fight among themselves constantly. Their own history is a record of wars and disasters. What could they possibly offer us? I do not know, Vyeth said honestly. But they are the only ones we have not asked. Delsha looked at him for a long moment. Then she sighed and nodded. There was nothing left to lose. The message was short. Vyeth wrote it himself, stripping away the formal language and diplomatic codes that the Median powers expected. He did not have the energy for ceremony. He simply told the truth. We are the Rithani. We number 1.6 million souls. Our world is gone. We have been traveling for 12 years. We have asked every civilization we know for help. All of them wanted something from us that we could not give. We are tired, we are sick, our children are growing up in metal corridors and have never seen a sky. We do not ask for much. We ask only for shelter, a place to stop, a place to breathe. If you can help us, please respond. If you cannot, we understand. We are used to silence. He scented toward the little yellow star and sat down in his chair and waited for nothing. 3 days passed. The fleet drifted on. 2 more water recyclers failed. A child was born in the engine room of Ship 19. Vyeth attended the naming ceremony and smiled for the parents, and then returned to his quarters and sat in the dark. On the morning of the 4th day, Delsha burst through his door. Her glow was white, the Rithani color of pure, overwhelming shock. Elder, we received a response. Vyeth took the data tablet from her hands. The message was not from a government official or a diplomatic corps. It came from something called the United Earth Emergency Humanitarian Command. The format was plain. The language was direct. There were no conditions listed. No demands, no price. It read, Signal received. Hold position. Help is en route. Estimated arrival, 11 days. Hang in there. Vyeth read it 3 times, then a 4th. He looked up at Delsha, and his glow, which had been gray for months, flickered. A tiny, uncertain pulse of blue. That is all, he whispered. They just said yes? They just said yes. He looked down at the message again. The last 3 words caught his eye. Hang in there. He did not fully understand the phrase. It was informal, almost casual, but there was something in it. Something warm and stubborn and impossibly simple that made his throat tighten. Somewhere out on the galactic rim, a species he had never met had heard that strangers were suffering, and their first and only response had been to come. Vyeth Soren sat in his chair aboard a dying ship in the middle of empty space, and for the first time in 12 years, his light glowed steady and bright. What kind of species, he said softly, simply says yes? No one answered, but 11 days felt, for the first time, like something he could survive. On the 11th day, the Rithani long-range sensors picked up incoming contacts, and the entire fleet held its breath. Vyeth stood on the bridge of the last light, surrounded by his officers, watching the sensor display fill with signatures. 1 contact became 5. 5 became 15. 15 became 37. 37 ships. They had asked for shelter, and the humans had sent 37 ships. The fleet that dropped out of faster-than-light travel in front of the Rithani convoy was unlike anything Vyeth had ever seen. It was not elegant. It was not beautiful in the way that Drayli warships were beautiful, all sharp angles and polished armor. The human ships were blocky, practical, and covered in markings and painted symbols that Vyeth did not understand. Some of them had names written on their hulls, in large, bold letters. One was called Open Hand. Another was called Second Chance. A massive construction vessel simply had the words "We build stuff" stenciled across its cargo bay doors. But it was the 2 ships at the center of the formation that made every officer on the Rithani bridge go silent. They were enormous, twice the size of anything else in the fleet, bristling with weapons arrays that glowed faintly with stored energy. Dark gray, heavy, and built with a single obvious purpose. These were not construction ships. These were not medical vessels. These were warships. One was called the UES Vigil. The other was called the UES No Mercy Given. Vaeth felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Why would a rescue fleet bring warships? The answer came an hour later, when a shuttle detached from the carrier open hand and docked with the last light. The airlock opened, and Commander Lena Achebe stepped aboard. She was shorter than Vaeth expected. Humans were smaller than most galactic species. She had dark brown skin and close-cropped hair, and eyes that were calm and steady and missed nothing. She wore a simple gray uniform with a patch on her shoulder, a blue circle with a white hand reaching upward. Behind her came 4 officers, 2 engineers, and a medical doctor, all carrying datapads and equipment cases. She did not bow. She did not perform any ritual greeting. She simply extended her hand, a human gesture that Vaeth had studied, and said, "Elder Soren, I'm Commander Achebe, United Earth Emergency Humanitarian Command. We're here to help." Vaeth took her hand carefully. Her grip was warm and firm. "Commander, we did not expect so many ships." Achebe smiled. It was a small smile, tired but genuine. "We believe in being thorough." She did not waste time with ceremony. Within minutes, she had unrolled a holographic display on the Rithani command table, and was walking Vaeth and his council through a logistics plan that the humans had clearly been preparing since the moment they received the signal. 3 moons had been surveyed in a nearby system. One of them, designated Sethari 3, had the right gravity, the right mineral composition, and enough subsurface water to support a permanent colony. Human architects had already designed modular habitat domes that could be adapted to Rithani biological needs. The first dome could be pressurized and livable in 72 hours. The full colony build-out was estimated at 4 months. Vaeth listened to all of this in stunned silence. The plan was detailed, practical, and clearly put together by people who had done this before. "You have done this before," he said, half a question. Achebe nodded. 3 times in the last decade, the Pelori, the Hask, and the Mivrani, all refugee populations, all resettled. "I did not know this. The galactic median doesn't report on it much. We're not important enough to make their news feeds." There was no bitterness in her voice, just a statement of fact. The Rithani Council had 1,000 questions, and Achebe answered every one of them with patience and clarity. Food supplies were on the agricultural ships. Medical teams were standing by. Engineers were ready to begin work immediately. Everything had been planned, packed, and shipped in 11 days. It was Vaeth who finally asked the question that had been sitting in the room like a weight. "Commander, your fleet includes warships, 2 of them, very large ones. Why?" Achebe's expression did not change, but something shifted behind her eyes, something harder. "Because the last 3 refugee convoys we helped were raided before they could settle," she said quietly. "The Pelori were attacked by pirates 2 weeks after we began construction. The Hask colony was bombed by a regional warlord who claimed territorial rights. We learned a lesson from that, Elder, a painful one. We do not make the same mistake twice." She paused and met his eyes directly. "The warships are not here for you. They are here for anyone who tries to hurt you." The room was silent for a long moment. Then the work began. Over the next 72 hours, Vaeth watched something he had never seen before. The human fleet moved with a speed and energy that was almost frightening. Construction ships locked into orbit around Sethari 3, and began dropping prefabricated dome segments onto the surface. Engineers in heavy suits worked around the clock in shifts, bolting together the skeletal framework of the first habitat dome, with tools and machines that roared and sparked, and filled the thin atmosphere with noise. The Rithani engineers joined them, cautiously at first, then with growing enthusiasm. The 2 species could not have been more different in their approach. The Rithani planned everything in advance, drew careful diagrams, and discussed each decision at length. The humans improvised. They sketched ideas on metal panels with markers. They argued loudly, waved their arms, and occasionally threw things. And then, somehow, things got built. A Rithani structural engineer named Cora spent an entire afternoon arguing with a human architect named Tomas about the curvature of a dome panel. They disagreed about everything. By evening, they were sitting together on a cargo crate, sharing a meal and laughing about how the panel had cracked during installation, and they had both been wrong. Meanwhile, something quieter was happening on the medical frigates. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a human xenobiologist, had begun screening Rithani refugees and discovered something troubling. Nearly 40% of the population showed signs of chronic radiation sickness. Their old ships had been leaking low-level radiation for years, and their medical systems were too damaged to detect it. Tanaka did not file a report and wait for approval. She did not send a request through the chain of command. She walked directly onto the Lastlight, found Vaith, and told him the truth. "Your people are sick, Elder. Many of them have been sick for a long time. The children are the most affected." Vaith felt his glow dim. "We did not know it was this bad." "It's treatable," Tanaka said firmly. "We brought the equipment. I've already set up treatment bays on 3 of our medical ships. I need your doctors to work with mine. We can start today." She did not ask for permission from her superiors. She did not negotiate terms. She simply began saving lives, because lives needed saving. By the end of the 3rd day, the first habitat dome on Sithari 3 was sealed and pressurized. The humans had named it Sunrise. The atmosphere inside was warm, breathable, and faintly sweet with the smell of the soil that the agricultural teams had already begun laying down. Vaith walked through the dome's entrance and stood on solid ground for the first time in 12 years. The floor beneath his feet was real earth, not metal plating, not recycled composite. Above him, the dome's transparent ceiling showed the stars. He knelt down and pressed his palm flat against the ground. His glow brightened slowly, shifting from gray to blue to a deep, steady violet, the Rithani color of home. Behind him, a group of Rithani children ran through the entrance, their parents calling after them. They had never stood on ground before. They stumbled and fell and laughed, and their little bodies lit up in a riot of colors that filled the dome like scattered jewels. A human engineer watching nearby wiped her eyes with the back of her glove and pretended she was adjusting her helmet. That evening, Vaith found a chibi on the observation deck of the Open Hand. She was looking at the sensor display, and her expression was not the warm, calm one he had come to know. It was sharp, focused. "Commander, long-range sensors picked up a formation at the edge of the system," she said. "Drayli Dominion, scout ships. They're watching." The cold knot returned to Vaith's stomach. "They know we are here. They know." Achebi turned to him, and there was something in her face that was both reassuring and terrifying. "That's why we brought the vigil, and the no mercy given, Elder. Let them watch. If they do anything more than watch, they will learn why we named that ship what we did." She turned back to the sensor display, and the stars above Sithari 3 suddenly felt a little less safe than they had an hour ago. The colony grew faster than anyone expected. Within 3 weeks, 4 habitat domes stood on the surface of Sithari 3. Dome Sunrise was fully operational, housing nearly 50,000 Rithani in clean, warm quarters with real air and running water. Dome 2, called Stillwater by the human engineers, held the medical facilities where Dr. Tanaka and her team were treating the radiation sickness that had quietly been killing the Rithani for years. Domes 3 and 4 were agricultural, massive transparent structures filled with soil beds, water systems, and the first tiny green shoots of Rithani food crops that the seed ships had carried across the stars. Children played in the corridors. Families cooked meals in real kitchens for the first time in over a decade. Rethani elders sat on benches in the agricultural domes and watched plants grow and wept without shame, their glow shifting through colors that had no translation in any human language, but clearly meant something close to peace. It was, for a brief and beautiful moment, everything that Vaeth had dreamed of. Then the Drayli Dominion sent their message. It arrived on a formal diplomatic channel, encoded with the official seals of the Dominion High Command. It was addressed to Commander Achebe, with copies sent to every major government in the galactic median. The language was precise, legal, and cold. The message stated that under Median Salvage and Reclamation Law, Section 14, Subsection 7, the Rethani people were classified as a displaced biological population without sovereign territorial claim. Because the Dominion had offered the Rethani asylum before the humans intervened, the Rethani were now considered pre-claimed assets under Dominion jurisdiction. The humans were ordered to withdraw from the Sithari system within 10 standard days and surrender the Rethani population to Dominion custody. The word they used was custody. Not care, not protection, custody. Achebe read the message on the bridge of the open hand, with her senior officers around her. The room was very quiet when she finished. Lieutenant Commander Okafor, her second-in-command, spoke first. "They're calling people property." "They are," Achebe said. "And they're using Median law to justify it." "They are." "What do we do?" Achebe set the datapad down on the table. She looked at each of her officers in turn. Then she picked up the communications handset and dictated her response. It was one sentence long. "The Rethani are people, not cargo. This is not a negotiation." She sent it on the same open channel the Dominion had used, which meant every government in the Median heard it too. Far away, on the bridge of the Drayli flagship Throne of Scars, Warlord Kreth Vasur received the human response and crushed the datapad in his hand. Kreth was old for a Drayli, which meant he was scarred, experienced, and very dangerous. He had commanded fleets for 40 years. He had conquered 12 systems. He had broken the resistance of 6 species and absorbed their populations into the Dominion's labor network. He understood power the way a surgeon understood a blade, with precision and without sentiment. The humans confused him. He had read every intelligence report his analysts could produce about the species. They were young. Their civilization was barely a few thousand years old, and they had been in space for less than a century. They were small, fragile, short-lived. They fought among themselves constantly. Their history was a bloody mess of wars and revolutions and disasters that should have destroyed them 10 times over. And yet they had not been destroyed. That was the part that nagged at him. His chief analyst, a thin Drali named Savur, had flagged a concept in the human psychological profile that defied easy translation. The closest Drali word was something like bitter refusal, but that was not quite right. The humans called it spite, the willingness to endure enormous cost and suffering, not for strategic gain, but simply to deny an enemy what they wanted. It was, by any rational standard, insane. Kreth did not like things he could not predict. "Send the second fleet," he ordered. 60 ships. Position them at the system's edge. Standard pressure formation. It was a tactic the Dominion had used 100 times. Arrive in overwhelming numbers. Do not attack. Simply sit there, visible and massive, and let the smaller power understand what will happen if they do not comply. It had worked on the Kesserai. It had worked on the Mivrani before the humans intervened. It had always worked. The 60 ships arrived at the edge of the Sithari system 2 days later, and arranged themselves in a wide arc, weapons powered but not targeting. A wall of metal and fire, visible on every sensor screen in the system. On the surface of Sithari 3, Vaeth watched the sensor data update and felt his glow go pale. 60 warships, Delsha said beside him, her voice barely above a whisper. Against 2, Vaeth said. He turned to find Achabe, who had come down to the colony to oversee the latest dome construction. She was standing with a group of engineers, looking at a structural diagram, when Vaeth approached her. Commander, the Dominion has sent 60 warships. Achabe looked up from the diagram. I know. We've been tracking them since they entered the sector. You have 2 warships, 2, against 60. I can count, Elder. Commander, please. Vaeth's glow was flickering, the Rithani sign of deep distress. We cannot be the reason for a war. We have already lost 1 home. We cannot bear the weight of others dying for us. Perhaps if we negotiate, if we offer something. Offer what? Achabe said, not unkindly. What do you have that they want, Elder? They don't want your resources. They don't want your technology. They want your people. They want bodies for their labor camps. And you want me to negotiate that? Vaeth had no answer. Achabe set down her datapad and looked at him directly. Her voice was quiet, but carried a weight that made the air feel heavier. Elder Soren, I need you to understand something. We did not come here to hand you over. We did not cross half the galaxy, build your homes, treat your sick, and hold your children in our medical bays so that we could pack you up and deliver you to someone who sees you as inventory. That is not who we are. That is not what we do. She paused. We came here to make sure no one ever makes you run again. Vaeth stared at her. His glow steadied, slowly, into something close to white. On the Vigil and the No Mercy Given, the human crews went to battle stations. The 2 warships moved forward from the fleet formation and positioned themselves between the colony and the Drayli Armada. Their weapons arrays powered up, not silently, not subtly, but with a full broadcast of their targeting signatures on every open frequency. It was, in galactic terms, the equivalent of standing in an open field and showing your enemy exactly what weapons you carried. It was considered reckless, arrogant, and provocative. The humans did it deliberately. Every ship in the sector could now see the precise capabilities of the 2 human warships. The energy output of their main guns, the range of their missile systems, the sophistication of their electronic warfare suites. The humans were not hiding anything. They were saying, clearly and loudly, this is what you will face if you come closer. On the throne of scars, Kreth studied the broadcast data in silence. His weapons officers shifted uncomfortably. Their technology is more advanced than our projections suggested, Savor said carefully. I can see that. Warlord, the energy signatures on those main batteries are significant. If those readings are accurate, each of those warships could engage 15 to 20 of our vessels simultaneously. We have 60 ships. Yes, Warlord, but the cost of taking those 2 ships would be considerable. Kreth was quiet for a long time. Then he said, they are bluffing. No species risks war for strangers. No species fights and dies for people they met 3 weeks ago. It is not rational. Savor hesitated. Warlord, the reports on human behavior suggest that rationality is not always their primary motivation. Kreth looked at him sharply. Then what is? Savor thought about the intelligence files, about the human concept of spite, about the long, bloody, beautiful history of a species that had torn itself apart over and over again, and somehow always put itself back together, not because it was logical, but because something in them refused to stop. Principle, Warlord, he said quietly. They appear to be motivated by principle. Kreth stared at the sensor display, at the 2 small ships sitting in the void between his armada and a colony of refugees, broadcasting their weapons like a dare. Move to attack formation, he said. The 60 ships began to shift. The first shots were not aimed at the human warships. They were aimed at the domes. Kreth had chosen his opening move carefully. He did not want to fight the humans directly. Not yet. He wanted to prove a point. He wanted to show the Rithani and the entire watching galaxy that the humans could not protect what they had built. Destroy the colony, and the refugees would have nowhere to go. The humans would have nothing left to defend. It was a clean, cruel, efficient strategy, and it had worked many times before against many species. 12 Drayli fast attack ships broke from the main formation and accelerated towards Sathari 3 on an attack run, their weapons locked onto the dome coordinates. They were small, quick, and designed for exactly this kind of precision strike. Hit the target, break the spirit, win without a real fight. They made it halfway before the UES Vigil cut across their path. The Vigil did not fire a warning shot. It did not broadcast a demand to stand down. Commander Achebe had given her orders before the battle began, and they were simple. Anything that moves toward the colony dies. The Vigil's point defense grid lit up like a wall of white fire. Thousands of small, precisely targeted energy pulses filled the space between the warship and the incoming Drayli attack ships. The first 3 ships flew directly into the grid and came apart in silence. No explosions in space, just a sudden flash and then expanding clouds of debris and frozen gas. The remaining 9 ships scattered, trying to find a way around. The Vigil's main batteries tracked them with a speed that made Kreth's weapons officers curse under their breath. 2 more were hit, trying to loop under the warship's firing arc. A 6th was caught by a missile that had been launched 30 seconds earlier and had been waiting quietly in its path. In 4 minutes, 6 of the 12 fast attack ships were gone. The surviving 6 turned and ran back to the main formation. On the bridge of the Throne of Scars, Kreth watched the tactical display and said nothing for a long moment. "They are faster than projected," Savor said. Kreth's jaw tightened. He had expected resistance. He had not expected this. The human point defense systems were not just good, they were extraordinary, faster, more accurate, and more adaptable than anything in the Dominion's arsenal. And they had not even used their main guns yet. But Kreth was a warlord with 40 years of experience and 60 warships at his command. He had not built his career on retreating from surprises. "All ships," he ordered. "Full assault. Target both warships. Overwhelm them." 49 remaining Drayli warships surged forward in a broad attack wave. The battle that followed lasted 23 minutes. In galactic military history, it would later be studied, debated, and argued over for decades. Not because of its scale. There had been far larger battles, but because of what it revealed about the species called humanity. The 2 human warships were outnumbered roughly 25 to 1. By every standard calculation of naval warfare, they should have been destroyed in the first exchange of fire. The Drayli had numbers, firepower, and experience. The humans had 2 ships, a handful of support vessels, and the colony behind them. What the Drayli did not account for was the way humans fought. The Vigil, and no mercy given, did not hold a defensive line and absorbed fire. They moved, constantly, aggressively. They wove through the Drayli formation, forcing the larger fleet to spread out and track multiple angles of attack. Their electronic warfare systems jammed Drayli targeting computers, creating ghost signatures and false readings that made it almost impossible to get a clean firing solution. And it was not just the warships. Every human vessel in the system became part of the battle. The construction haulers, massive slow ships designed to carry dome segments and building materials, deployed their cargo as improvised barriers, walls of metal and composite that blocked Drayli sensors and created blind spots in the battle space. The medical frigates, small and fast, activated jamming equipment that scrambled Drayli communications, cutting individual ships off from their command network. 2 agricultural seed ships repositioned their enormous solar collection arrays and reflected focused light into the optical sensors of Drayli targeting systems, effectively blinding them at critical moments. None of these ships were built for war, but their crews had decided independently and without orders that everything they had could be used to protect the colony. A construction crane became a sensor shield. A water recycling barge became an electromagnetic decoy. A grain transport became a ramming platform aimed at a Draeli destroyer's engine section, forcing it to break off its attack run. Kreth watched his tactical display dissolve into chaos. His fleet was not being outfought by 2 warships. It was being outfought by an entire civilian fleet that had decided, collectively, to become a weapon. "They are using their cargo ships," his tactical officer reported, voice tight with disbelief. "The construction vessels are deploying debris fields. The medical ships are jamming our communications. The agricultural ships are blinding our sensors." "They are insane," Kreth said. "They are winning," Savor said quietly. The no mercy given took the worst of it. A concentrated strike from 8 Draeli ships caught it in a crossfire that collapsed its forward shields and blew through 2 decks of its port side. Fires broke out. Power systems failed. The main lights went dark, and the bridge was lit only by emergency strips and the glow of damage reports on cracked screens. Captain James Mwangi, commanding the No Mercy Given, was thrown from his chair by the impact. He pulled himself up, blood running from a cut on his forehead, and looked at the damage readouts. Main power was gone. Shields were gone. Half his weapons were offline. His first officer shouted over the noise, "Captain, we've lost main power. We should pull back to the fleet for cover." Mwangi looked at the tactical display. The No Mercy Given was positioned directly between a Draeli attack wing and the colony. If he moved, the colony would be exposed for at least 90 seconds before the Vigil could reposition. 90 seconds was enough time for the Draeli to level Dome Sunrise. "Reroute life support to weapons," he said. His first officer stared at him. "Sir, that means—" "I know what it means. Reroute life support to weapons. Seal all compartments. Tell the crew to hold their breath." The No Mercy Given went dark. Every system not directly connected to its weapons grid was shut down. No lights, no air recycling, no gravity on half the decks. The crew floated in the dark, breathing the air they had, and kept firing. The Draeli attack wing, expecting the damaged ship to retreat, flew directly into a full broadside from guns that should not have been operational. 4 more Draeli ships were destroyed in the exchange. The rest broke formation. On the bridge of the Throne of Scars, Kreth stared at the sensor data showing a crippled human warship, without power, without life support, fighting in the dark, and refusing to move. He had conquered 12 systems. He had broken 6 species. He had never seen anything like this. The intelligence reports had warned him. The analysts had tried to explain. But there was no way to truly understand what you were dealing with until you saw it yourself. A species that did not calculate the cost of resistance, because for them, the cost of surrender was always higher. "Warlord," Savor said, and his voice held something that Kreth had not heard from him in 40 years of service. It held fear. "The humans are not going to stop. We can destroy those 2 ships, and their cargo vessels will ram us. We can destroy those, and their escape pods will ram us. There is no level of force that will make them retreat. They will fight until there is nothing left of them, and they will make us pay for every second of it." Kreth looked at the tactical display. He had lost 11 ships. 11 ships against 2 warships and a handful of civilian vessels. The cost of taking the colony would be 30 ships, maybe more. A victory that would cripple his fleet and humiliate the Dominion. For refugees, for a species he had never met, defending a species no one else had wanted. "Withdraw," he said. The word tasted like ash. "All ships, withdraw." The Draeli fleet turned and left. On the surface of Sethari 3, The Rathani had watched the entire battle through the observation panels of domed sunrise. They had seen the flashes of weapons fire in the dark sky. They had tracked the movements of ships on improvised sensor displays. They had watched the No Mercy Given go dark and thought it was dead, and then watched it fire again and again from the darkness. When the Drayli signatures disappeared from the sensor screens, the dome was completely silent. Then, very slowly, the Rathani began to glow. Not in celebration, not in triumph, in something deeper and older and harder to name. A color that spread from one person to the next, until the entire dome was filled with it. A deep, trembling gold that the Rathani had not used in generations. It was the color of being witnessed, the color of being valued, the color of someone standing between you and the dark and saying you matter enough to fight for. No one had ever done that for them before. The communication system crackled, and Commander Achebe's voice filled the dome. She sounded tired. She sounded like someone who'd been knocked around a bridge for 20 minutes and had glass in her hair and blood on her uniform. But her voice was steady. Sunrise is safe. Begin morning shift as scheduled. Vaeth Soren stood among his glowing people and listened to a battered, bleeding human tell them to go about their day as if nothing had happened, as if defending 1,000,000 strangers against an empire was just part of the morning routine. And he understood something that the galactic median would spend decades trying to figure out. The humans were not powerful because of their ships or their weapons or their technology. They were powerful because they simply did not accept that the suffering of strangers was someone else's problem. And the galaxy had no idea what to do with that. 6 months later, the moon of Sithari III had a new name. The Rathani called it New Sithara, and it looked nothing like it had when the first human construction ship entered orbit. 14 habitat domes now covered the surface, connected by pressurized walkways and transport tunnels that hummed with life. Dome Sunrise, the first one built, had become the heart of the colony, a sprawling center of homes, markets, meeting halls, and a public garden where Rathani crops grew alongside human flowers that Dr. Tanaka's team had planted as a gift. The garden had become the most popular place on the colony. Rathani elders sat there for hours, watching things grow, their glow a quiet, steady blue. The medical crisis was over. Tanaka's treatment program had reached every Rathani in the fleet. The radiation sickness that had been slowly killing them for years was now under control. Birth rates were rising for the first time in decades. New children were being born, not in metal corridors, but in clean rooms, with warm light and real air. And their parents named them after the domes they were born in. There were already 3 children named Sunrise. Schools had opened. Rathani children learned their own history and language, alongside courses in human mathematics and engineering. Human children on the colony, the sons and daughters of engineers and doctors who had chosen to stay, sat beside them, struggling to pronounce Rathani words and laughing at their own mistakes. A joint university was being planned, the first of its kind between a human and an alien species. The cultural exchange had surprised everyone, especially the humans. Rathani bioluminescent art, paintings and sculptures that glowed and shifted color with the viewer's mood, had been transmitted to Earth's communication networks and had become enormously popular. A Rathani artist named Selu became the first non-human to have a gallery exhibition in Paris. Her work sold out in 2 hours. She had no idea what Paris was, but she was very pleased about it. In return, the Rathani had discovered human music. It baffled and delighted them in equal measure. They could not understand why one species had produced so many different kinds of sound, from soft piano melodies to thundering percussion to something called jazz that made absolutely no structural sense, but somehow made the listener feel like everything might be all right. The colony's main hall played human music every evening, and Rathani families gathered to listen, with their lights shifting in patterns that the humans had started calling glow dancing. Vyeth Soren watched all of this with a wonder that had not faded in 6 months. He walked through the domes every morning, past construction crews and medical teams and children chasing each other through corridors. And he tried to remember what despair had felt like. It was getting harder to recall. That gray, flat emptiness that had lived in his chest for 12 years had been slowly replaced by something warm and heavy and solid, like a stone heated by sunlight. The UES No Mercy Given remained in orbit above New Sathara. It had been repaired and refitted after the battle, its damaged sections rebuilt with a combination of human engineering and Rythani design, a collaboration that had produced a hull section that was both stronger and lighter than anything either species had built alone. The ship's captain, James Mwangi, had become a fixture of colony life. He attended every Rythani festival, ate every dish the cooks put in front of him, regardless of how strange it looked, and had learned enough of the Rythani language to tell terrible jokes that made the elders groan and the children scream with laughter. His crew had adopted the colony completely. Off-duty sailors volunteered in the schools, helped in the gardens, and played sports with Rythani teenagers who found human games confusing and wonderful. The boundary between the human military presence and the Rythani civilian population had dissolved so naturally that most people had stopped noticing it was ever there. The Galactic Median, however, had noticed everything. The Traley Dominion had filed 17 formal protests with the Median Council, accusing humanity of territorial aggression, violation of salvage law, and illegal military deployment in neutral space. The Voss Compact had issued a statement expressing concern about human expansion. The Synodal Hive had simply said, in their collective monotone, that humanity was unpredictable and therefore dangerous. None of them did anything about it. The Battle of Sethari III, as it was now known, had been a very public and very embarrassing lesson. A single species with 2 warships and a fleet of cargo haulers had defeated 60 Dominion warships and refused to give ground. The sensor recordings of the battle had been shared across every network in the Median. Every species had seen the No Mercy Given fight in the dark. Every species had heard Achebe's transmission. Sunrise is safe. Begin morning shift, as scheduled. The message was not subtle. The humans would fight for strangers. The humans would fight outnumbered. The humans would reroute their own life support to weapons, rather than yield a single dome full of refugees they had met 3 weeks before. And if you thought you could take what they had chosen to protect, you were welcome to try. 3 other refugee species had already sent signals to Earth. The Pelani, a small aquatic people fleeing a corporate war. The Tessic, a nomadic species whose migration routes had been blocked by Dominion expansion. The Orenth, a peaceful agricultural civilization whose world had been poisoned by industrial pollution from a neighboring system. All of them had heard about New Sathara. All of them had sent the same simple message. Can you help us too? Earth had said yes, every time. On a warm afternoon in the colony's 6th month, Vaith received an unexpected visitor. A diplomat from the Galactic Median Council, a tall and elegant being from a species Vaith did not recognize, arrived at New Sathara on a formal inspection tour. The diplomat was polite, but clearly confused by what he found. He had expected a refugee camp, temporary, desperate, dependent. Instead, he found a thriving colony, with schools and gardens and children who had never known hunger. Over tea, in Vyeth's office, a drink the humans had introduced and the Rythani had immediately adopted, the diplomat asked the question that Vyeth knew had been the real purpose of the visit. Elder Soren, the council is curious. You had offers from 3 major powers, the Dominion, the Compact, and the Hive. All of them are established, powerful, and capable of providing for your people. Instead, you chose to ally with the humans, a young, volatile minor species with no significant standing in the median. Many in the council find this decision difficult to understand. Can you explain why? Vyeth took a sip of his tea. It was a blend that Dr. Tanaka had created specifically for Rithani taste, gentle and warm, with a faint sweetness. He held the cup in both hands and looked at the diplomat for a long moment. "We sent our plea to every great civilization in the galaxy," he said. "Every one of them heard us. The empires calculated the cost and the profit. The collectives debated whether we were useful. The hegemonies looked at us and saw what they could take. Every door we knocked on had a price behind it, and the price was always our dignity, our freedom, or our bodies." He set his cup down. "And then we sent a signal to the edge of the galaxy, to a species that no one in the median takes seriously. A species that everyone calls primitive and chaotic and young. And do you know what they did?" The diplomat waited. "They heard that strangers were suffering, and they simply came. They did not calculate. They did not debate. They did not ask what we could offer in return. They sent architects because we needed homes. They sent domes because we needed shelter. They sent doctors because we were sick. And they sent warships because they knew before we did, that the galaxy would try to stop them from helping us." His glow brightened, slow and steady, filling the room with a deep and certain light. "That is not chaos, Ambassador. That is not primitive. That is a species that has decided, against all reason and all self-interest, that compassion is something worth fighting for. That the suffering of strangers is not someone else's problem. That the correct response to a cry for help is not negotiation. It is to show up." He paused. "And that is why we trust them. Because they earned it in the only way that matters. They showed up when no one else would." The diplomat left New Sathara that afternoon. Vyeth never learned what he reported to the council. It did not particularly matter. That evening, Vyeth walked to the observation gallery of Dome Sunrise and stood at the window. Below him, the latest construction site was alive with activity. Dome 15 was taking shape, its skeletal frame rising from the ground like a ribcage. Human and Rithani engineers working side by side in the fading light, their voices carrying through the thin air in a mixture of two languages that was slowly becoming one. A small Rithani girl, no older than 5, was standing at the edge of the construction site, watching the engineers work with wide, glowing eyes. She tugged on the sleeve of a nearby human engineer, a big, broad-shouldered woman with dust on her face and a smile that could light a room. "What will this dome be called?" the girl asked. The engineer knelt down, so they were eye to eye. She grinned. "That's up to you, sweetheart. It's your home." The girl's glow brightened, a sudden brilliant burst of gold and white and violet that rippled across her small body like sunrise breaking over water. Pure, unguarded, unburdened joy. Vyeth watched from the gallery above, and his own light answered hers, a steady, warm glow that filled the glass and spilled out into the evening air above New Sathara, where the stars looked down on a colony that should not have existed, built by a species that should not have cared, for a people that no one else had wanted. And out in orbit, the UES No Mercy Given kept its quiet watch, its running lights blinking against the dark, a steady reminder to anyone watching that this place and these people were loved and defended and home.